Colorado Territory, 1872. The first hint of dawn had just begun to paint the eastern horizon when the shots rang out across the valley. Thomas Trace Norwood slumped in his saddle, warm blood soaking through his shirt as his horse continued its desperate gallop away from the ambush. At 24, he had already seen more than his share of the West's brutality, but this was different. This time he was the target. "Keep going, Scout," he whispered to his palomino, gripping the saddle horn with bloodied fingers. His vision blurred at the edges as the sun finally crested the mountains, illuminating the vast expanse of valley stretching before him. In the distance stood a small homestead, smoke curling from the chimney against the morning sky. Trace had learned one harsh truth in his years riding these territories: a man survives only by relying on himself. Trust was a luxury that got men killed on the frontier. His father had taught him that lesson with a belt and bitter words long before the war had reinforced it with gunpowder and blood. The world tilted sideways as Trace felt himself sliding from the saddle. Scout slowed, perhaps sensing his rider's failing strength. The ground rose up to meet him, and the last thing Trace saw before darkness claimed him was a woman rushing from the homestead's front door, her golden hair catching the morning light like a halo. "Mama, there's a man fallen out front," Zara Abernathy called over her shoulder, rushing across the yard, her long chestnut brown hair flowing behind her as she ran. At 20 years old, Zara had already taken on the responsibilities of the homestead after her mother's passing 2 winters prior. Her blue calico dress whipped around her ankles as she approached the fallen stranger. "Lord have mercy," her father, James Abernathy, muttered as he emerged from the house with his rifle. "Zara, stay back, could be trouble." But Zara was already kneeling beside the wounded man. His face was pale beneath the trail dust, but she could see he was handsome, with strong features and light brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. Blood had soaked through his shirt on the left side, just below his shoulder. "He's been shot, Pa," she said, pressing her hand against the wound. "Help me get him inside." James Abernathy hesitated, eyes scanning the horizon. Could be outlaws after him. Or he could be the outlaw himself. "He'll die if we leave him," Zara insisted, her voice firm with the quiet determination that had seen their little family through the hardships of frontier life. "We can decide what to do with him once we've stopped this blading." Her father sighed, knowing that particular tone in his daughter's voice. Together, they managed to carry the unconscious stranger into their modest home and lay him on Zara's bed. "I'll tend to his horse," James said, heading back outside. "You know what your mother would do." Zara nodded, already gathering clean rags and heating water. Her mother had been the closest thing to a doctor this part of the territory had seen, teaching Zara everything she knew about healing herbs and tending wounds. It was a skill that had proven useful more times than she cared to count on the frontier. As she cut away the stranger's bloodied shirt, Zara couldn't help noticing the lean strength of his frame. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and beneath the dirt and blood she could see other scars, evidence of a hard life lived. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, which was both a blessing and a concern. "Less lead to dig out, but more blood lost. Who are you?" she whispered as she began to clean the wound. "And who wanted you dead?" 3 days passed before Trace opened his eyes. He woke to the gentle sound of humming and the feel of a cool cloth against his forehead. For a moment, he thought he must have died, but the throbbing pain in his shoulder quickly dismissed that notion. "You're awake," said a soft voice. Trace blinked, his vision clearing to reveal a young woman sitting beside the bed. Sunlight streaming through a window behind her caught her chestnut hair, bringing out hints of gold and auburn within the rich brown. Her eyes, a clear blue like summer skies, watched him with a mixture of relief and caution. "Where am I?" His voice came out as a rasp, his throat dry as prairie dust. "Abernathy Homestead," she replied, helping him take a sip of water. "I'm Zara. My father and I found you 3 days ago, half dead on our doorstep." 3 days, Trace attempted to sit up, only to be gently but firmly pushed back down. "The bullet went through your shoulder. You lost a lot of blood and fever took hold for a time. You're lucky to be alive, mister." "Norwood," he supplied after a moment's hesitation. "Trace Norwood." Something in the way he said his name made Zara study him more carefully. There was wariness in his hazel eyes, a guardedness that spoke of more than just physical pain. "Well, mister Norwood, you're welcome to stay until you're well enough to travel, but my father has some questions about who might be looking for you." "No one who bring trouble to decent folk," Trace answered, though the way his eyes briefly darted to the window suggested otherwise. "I'm obliged for your help, Miss Abernathy, but I should be moving on soon as I can stand. That won't be today or tomorrow, Zara said matter-of-factly. The body needs time to heal, even for stubborn cowboys. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, and something in Zara's chest fluttered in response. She busied herself adjusting his bandages, aware of his gaze following her movements. You have a healer's touch, he observed. Reminds me of. When he didn't continue, Zara glanced up to find his expression had clouded. Of who? No one, he said, turning his face away. Just someone I knew a long time ago. Over the following week, Trace gradually regained his strength. James Abernathy kept a watchful eye on their guest, particularly when Zara was around him. But as days passed, even the cautious father had to admit there was something trustworthy about the young cowboy, despite his obvious reluctance to speak about his past. Trace proved to be a man of few words but thoughtful gestures. When he was finally able to move about, he insisted on helping with chores, fixing a loose board on the porch one afternoon despite Zara's protests about his healing shoulder. Been taking care of myself since I was 12, he told her as he hammered the final nail into place. This little scratch isn't going to keep me idle while I'm eating your food and sleeping under your roof. A bullet wound is hardly a scratch, Zara replied, handing him a cup of water. And it was my mother's belief that helping others was payment enough. Trace paused, taking a long drink before asking, Where is your mother now? A shadow crossed Zara's face. She passed 2 winters ago. Influenza. I'm sorry, he said, and there was genuine feeling in his voice. She must have been a fine woman to have raised a daughter like you. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected compliment. She was. Taught me everything I know about healing. People came from miles around when they needed help. And now they come to you. Trace set the hammer down and flexed his shoulder experimentally. Sometimes. Though I'm not nearly as knowledgeable as she was. You saved my life, he said simply. Seems to me you know plenty. That evening, as they sat around the table for supper, James Abernathy finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air since Trace's arrival. Those men who shot you, he began, setting down his fork, they likely to come looking. Trace considered the question, his expression giving nothing away. They think I'm dead, best it stays that way for a while. What did you do to earn their bullets? James pressed. Zara noticed how Trace's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his cup before he answered. I witnessed something I shouldn't have, a stagecoach robbery outside of Denver. Recognized one of the men as the son of a cattle baron from these parts, Randall Vickers. James Abernathy paled. Stanley Vickers' boy, that's dangerous knowledge, son. That's why they came after me, Trace acknowledged. I was fool enough to report what I saw to the sheriff in the next town over. Word got back to them somehow. The Vickers own half the county, Zara said quietly. They have men on their payroll everywhere. Trace nodded grimly. I'll be moving on soon as I can. Don't want to bring their attention to your doorstep. And go where? Zara asked, surprised by the concern in her own voice. If they think you're dead, staying hidden might be your best chance. Zara, her father warned. We need help with the spring planting anyway, Pa, she continued. And Mr. Norwood needs time to fully heal. It could be mutually beneficial. James Abernathy studied his daughter's face, seeing something there that made him sigh deeply. You can stay through planting season, he finally told Trace. By then, folks might have forgotten about you, and you'll be strong enough to travel if need be. I appreciate the offer, Trace said carefully, but I've learned it's best not to stay in one place too long. And I've learned that a man running usually just finds more trouble, James replied. Consider it at least. We could use the extra hands and you could use the time to heal proper. Later that night, Zara found Trace sitting on the porch steps, staring up at the vast canopy of stars. She hesitated in the doorway, watching the way the moonlight silvered his profile. You should be resting, she said softly. He turned, a faint smile touching his lips. Hard to rest when your mind won't quiet. Zara stepped out onto the porch and settled beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. What's keeping it from quieting? Too many ghosts, he said after a long moment. Too many miles of looking over my shoulder. Is that why you became a cowboy, to keep moving? Trace chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Became a cowboy because that's what my pa was before the war changed him. Learned to ride before I could walk proper. But yes, the moving suited me fine after things went bad back home. What happened? Zara asked, then immediately shook her head. I'm sorry. That's too personal a question. It is, he agreed, but then surprised her by continuing. My pa came back from the war a different man, mean, drinking too much. My ma couldn't take it anymore and left when I was 14. Pa took it out on me until I was big enough to fight back. And then? And then I left too, been drifting ever since. Trace absently rubbed his shoulder, found out that trusting folks just leads to disappointment, so I keep to myself. Safer that way. Zara watched his profile, noting the tightness around his mouth, the defensive set of his shoulders. That sounds lonely. Better lonely than betrayed, he said simply. Or getting good people hurt because they were kind enough to take in a stranger. Is that why you're planning to leave? You think you'll bring trouble to us? Trace turned to look at her directly, his expression deadly serious in the moonlight. I know I will if I stay too long. Men like Vickers don't forget. You saved my life once, Zara said suddenly. When Trace looked at her questioningly, she explained. 3 winters ago, before my mother died. A terrible blizzard hit while Pa was away in town. Our roof partially collapsed under the snow. I was trapped under a beam. Trace frowned. I don't understand, we only just met. Not you specifically, she clarified with a small smile. A cowboy passing through. He helped dig me out, stayed to repair the roof, left before Pa even returned to be thanked properly. What's your point, Miss Abernathy? My point, Mr. Norwood, is that sometimes the good we do for strangers comes back to us in ways we never expect. That cowboy didn't know that the woman he helped save would one day have the knowledge to save another cowboy with a bullet wound. She stood, smoothing her skirts. Perhaps you're exactly where you need to be right now. Before Trace could respond, she had disappeared back into the house, leaving him alone with the stars and thoughts more tangled than before. The following weeks brought the full flourishing of spring to the valley. The fields needed planting, fences required mending, and despite his initial reluctance, Trace found himself settling into the rhythm of life at the Abernathy homestead. His shoulder healed steadily under Zara's attentive care, and though he told himself daily that he should move on, somehow the right moment never seemed to arrive. James watched with a mixture of appreciation and concern as Trace proved himself an invaluable help around the property. The younger man worked from sunup to sundown, often taking on the heaviest tasks without being asked. Man works like he's trying to pay a debt, James remarked to Zara one evening as they watched Trace lead the horses into the barn. Or like he's trying to earn his place, Zara suggested, her gaze lingering on Trace's retreating figure. James studied his daughter's face, noting the gentle warmth in her eyes. You're growing fond of him. Zara's cheeks colored slightly. He's a good man, Pa, whatever his past troubles, I believe that. Good men can still bring danger to your door, James cautioned. And I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. And how is that? Zara asked, her heart beating a little faster. Like a man who's found water after days in the desert, her father said quietly. Desperate and disbelieving all at once. That night, unable to sleep, Zara slipped outside to find the moon high and bright above the homestead. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the sweet scent of spring blossoms. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and was surprised to hear the soft notes of a harmonica coming from the direction of the barn. Following the mournful tune, she found Trace sitting on a hay bale just inside the barn door, his face turned up to the night sky as he played. Something about the melody spoke of such profound loneliness that Zara felt her throat tighten with emotion. When the last note faded, she spoke softly from the doorway. That was beautiful. Sad but beautiful. Trace started slightly, quickly tucking the harmonica into his pocket. Didn't mean to disturb anyone. You didn't, she assured him, stepping into the barn. I couldn't sleep. That makes 2 of us. Zara settled on another hay bale a respectful distance away. Where did you learn to play like that? My mother taught me, Trace answered, surprising himself with his willingness to share the memory. Before she left, said music was the only way some feelings could find their way out. She sounds wise. She was, his voice grew distant. Wonder sometimes if she's still alive out there somewhere. Zara studied him in the moonlight filtering through the barn door. You've never tried to find her. Trace shook his head, wouldn't know where to start, and maybe it's better not knowing than finding out something you can't bear to hear. Is that how you approach everything? Better not to know, not to try. Her question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond his missing mother. Trace rubbed the back of his neck. uncomfortable with how easily she seemed to see through him. "When you've been disappointed enough times, you learn to expect it," he finally said. "Safer that way." "Safer, perhaps, but lonelier too." "What about you?" he asked, changing the subject. "Pretty girl like you must have suitors lining up from here to Denver." Zara laughed softly. "Hardly. The closest town is 20 miles away, and most young men there are looking for wives who haven't spent their lives learning to stitch wounds instead of quilts." "They're lost," Trace said with unexpected fierceness. "Any man worth his salt would value a woman with your skills and strength." Their eyes met across the shadowed space, and something electric passed between them. Zara felt her breath catch in her throat as Trace slowly rose and took a step toward her. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Trace instantly tensed, moving to the barn door and peering out into the night. "Expecting visitors?" he asked, his voice suddenly hard. "No," Zara said, joining him at the door. "Pa sometimes gets called to help neighbors, but not this late." The riders, three of them, approached the house directly, their silhouettes black against the moonlit yard. Trace pulled Zara back into the shadows of the barn. "Stay here," he whispered. "If there's trouble, run for the creek bed and follow it north." "I'm not leaving my father," she protested. Zara, his hand caught her arm, his grip urgent but gentle. "Please, these could be Vickers' men." The sound of the riders dismounting and heavy boots on the porch steps cut their argument short. Trace moved silently toward the back of the barn, returning moments later with James Abernathy's shotgun. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his expression brooking no argument. They crept toward the house, keeping to the shadows. Through the front window, they could see James standing in the doorway, blocking entrance to the three men on the porch. "Just asking if you've seen this man," one of the riders was saying, holding out what appeared to be a wanted poster. "Witness says he was shot but might have survived. Name's Thomas Norwood." Zara felt Trace stiffen beside her at the mention of his full name. "Haven't seen any strangers," James replied steadily. "Been a quiet spring so far." "Mind if we look around?" another rider asked, though it didn't sound like a request. "Mr. Vickers is offering a handsome reward." "It's the middle of the night," James said firmly, "and I don't take kindly to armed men inviting themselves onto my property. If I see this fella, I'll send word to town." The lead rider stepped closer to James, his hand resting meaningfully on his pistol. "We could insist." "You could try," James replied, and Zara realized with a shock that her father had his rifle just out of sight behind the door. The tense standoff stretched for several heartbeats before the lead rider finally nodded and stepped back. "We'll be back tomorrow in daylight," he warned. "Be smarter to cooperate." They mounted up and rode away, but Trace remained tense, watching until the riders disappeared into the darkness. "They'll be back," he said grimly as they approached the house, "and they'll bring more men next time." James met them at the door, his face grave. "You heard." Trace nodded. "I need to leave tonight. They're looking for me by name, which means they know I survived." "And go where?" Zara challenged. "They're watching the roads. They'll find you before you make it 10 miles. "She's right," James agreed reluctantly. "But staying puts you all in danger." "There's another option," Zara said slowly, an idea taking shape. "What if we hide you in plain sight?" Both men looked at her questioningly. "Pa, remember when Cousin Daniel came to stay with us after the war, how different he looked with his beard grown out?" James considered this. "You suggesting we disguise him?" "More than that," Zara continued, the plan becoming clearer as she spoke. "We introduce him as Daniel's friend, come to help with the farm. If they're looking for a lone rider named Thomas Norwood, they won't look twice at a farmhand named Travis." Trace supplied. "Travis Nelson." "We could say you were injured helping a neighbor with a barn raising," James added, warming to the idea. "Would explain the healing wound if anyone noticed." "It might work," Trace admitted, "at least until I'm fully healed and can travel farther faster." Zara felt a pang at his words, the reminder that he still planned to leave as soon as possible. "We should make those changes tonight," she said, pushing aside her disappointment. "They'll be back at first light." By morning, Trace looked remarkably different. He had trimmed his hair shorter in the style of a respectable farmhand rather than a drifting cowboy. His clothes, borrowed from James, were plain but well kept, the kind a man settled in one place might wear. Most importantly, his demeanor had changed. where before he had carried himself with the wary readiness of a man expecting trouble, now he affected the slightly stooped posture of someone recovering from a recent injury, moving with deliberate carefulness. "How do I look?" he asked Zara as she set breakfast on the table. "Like a completely different man," she admitted, trying not to notice how the clean-shaven jaw revealed a small scar near his chin that she hadn't seen before. "Though I'm not sure about the name you chose." "Travis Nelson was a friend who died at Shiloh," Trace explained quietly. "Seems fitting to borrow his name when I'm trying not to die myself." As predicted, the riders returned mid-morning, this time with 5 men instead of 3. Zara was hanging laundry while Trace, now Travis, carefully split kindling nearby, visibly favoring his right arm. "Good morning," Zara called as the riders approached, her heart hammering despite her outward calm. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The lead rider, a hard-faced man with a sheriff's badge that Zara suspected wasn't rightfully his, dismounted and approached. "Looking for a man," he said, holding out the wanted poster. "Thomas Norwood. Heard he might be in these parts, wounded." Zara glanced at the poster, careful to show only polite curiosity. "Haven't seen anyone like that. What's he wanted for?" "Murder," the man said, watching her face carefully. "Killed one of Stanley Vickers' ranch hands during a robbery attempt." Beside her, Trace stiffened almost imperceptibly before continuing his work. "How terrible," Zara said, handing back the poster. "We'll certainly keep an eye out." The false sheriff's gaze moved to Trace. "Who's this?" "Travis Nelson," Trace answered before Zara could speak, his voice deliberately pitched higher than usual. "Helping out while I recover." He gestured to his shoulder with a self-deprecating smile. "What happened to you?" "Beam fell during the Peterson barn raising," James supplied, emerging from the house. "Would have crushed him if he hadn't partly dodged. As it is, he's mending slow but sure." The sheriff studied Trace for an uncomfortable moment before nodding toward the barn. "Mind if we look around?" "Help yourself," James said easily. "Though I'd appreciate if you didn't disturb the new seedlings in the far field. Just put them in yesterday." As the men spread out to search the property, Zara moved closer to Trace. "You never told me you were accused of murder," she whispered. "Because I didn't murder anyone," he replied under his breath. "They're twisting things to justify hunting me down." "What really happened?" Trace set down the axe, wiping sweat from his brow. "I witnessed Randall Vickers and his men rob the stagecoach like I told you. What I didn't mention was that they shot the driver when he resisted. I tried to help him, but he died." "They're framing me for his murder." Zara's eyes widened. "That's why they want you dead. You're the only witness who could testify that Randall Vickers is a murderer." "Exactly," Trace's jaw tightened. "And Stanley Vickers won't let his son hang for murder, no matter how many innocent men have to die instead." The search proved fruitless, as there was nothing to find. Before departing, however, the false sheriff approached James once more. "We'll be watching the roads," he warned. "Norwood can't have gotten far with his wounds. When we catch him, anyone found to have helped him will face the same charges." "Understood," James said evenly. "Though I doubt a murderer would find much welcome around these parts." As the riders disappeared down the road, the 3 of them exchanged grim looks. "They didn't believe us," Zara said quietly. "No," James agreed, "but they didn't have cause to act either. For now, we continue the charade. And you," he turned to Trace, "need to decide what you're going to do. They're not giving up this hunt anytime soon." That evening, after James had retired, Trace found Zara sitting on the porch swing, a book open in her lap though she wasn't reading it. He hesitated in the doorway, struck by how the fading light softened her features, catching the warm highlights in her chestnut hair. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, moving slightly to make room, though the swing was built for 2. As he sat beside her, Trace was acutely aware of the propriety he was bending and how right it felt despite that. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward the book. "Wuthering Heights," she replied, "my mother's copy. I've read it so many times the binding is starting to fail." "Never read it myself," Trace admitted. "What's it about?" "Love, revenge, the terrible things people do to each other in the name of both." Zara closed the book gently. "It reminds me that passion without kindness becomes something destructive." "Sounds like a warning." "Perhaps," she turned to look at him directly. "Were you ever going to tell me the whole truth about why you're being hunted?" Trace sighed, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. "I didn't want to burden you with it. The less you knew, the safer you'd be if they found me here." I'm already harboring you and lying to armed men, Zara pointed out. I think I deserve to know what I was risking my life for. You're right, he acknowledged. I've spent so long keeping people at a distance it's become a habit, even when it doesn't serve me or those trying to help me. Is that why you've never put down roots anywhere? Because you don't want to let people close enough to see the real Thomas Norwood. The use of his full, real name made him look up sharply. There was something unsettling about hearing it from her lips, as though she was seeing through all his carefully constructed barriers. The real Thomas Norwood watched his family fall apart and couldn't stop it, he said quietly. Couldn't save his mother from leaving, couldn't save his father from the bottle. Couldn't save himself from becoming exactly what his father predicted, a drifter with nothing to his name but trouble. That's not what I see, Zara said, her voice gentle but firm. I see a man who risked his life trying to bring justice to a murderer, when most would have ridden away and forgotten what they saw. I see someone who works from dawn till dusk to repay a kindness, who plays the harmonica under the stars because that's the only time he lets himself remember. Trace stared at her, struck wordless by her perception. What I don't understand, she continued, is why you're so determined to believe you don't deserve more than a life of running. Because people who get close to me end up hurt, he said, his voice rough with emotion. My ma. The stage driver, now you and your father, in danger because I brought Vickers' men to your door. We chose to help you, Zara reminded him. That was our decision, not yours. And I'll never understand why you made it. Perhaps, Zara said softly, for the same reason you stopped to report a murder when most would have ridden on. Because it was the right thing to do, regardless of the cost. The swing creaked gently as they fell silent, each lost in thought. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I have to leave, Trace finally said. Not immediately, but soon. Find a way to clear my name, or at least get far enough away that Vickers Reach can't find me. And if you could stay, Zara asked, the question so quiet he almost didn't hear it. If there was a way to resolve this that didn't end with you riding away alone. Trace turned to look at her, really look at her. In the gathering twilight, her face was open, vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. I don't know if I remember how to stay in one place, he admitted, or if I ever knew. Perhaps, she suggested, a small smile touching her lips, that's something you could learn. Just as I learned to stitch wounds instead of quilts. The weeks that followed settled into a strange, tension-filled routine. To all outward appearances, Travis Nelson was simply a farmhand helping the Abernathys with spring planting. He worked alongside James in the fields, took meals with the family, and kept his head down whenever riders passed on the nearby road. But beneath this facade of normalcy, plans were being laid. James had sent word to his brother-in-law in Denver, a lawyer with connections to the territorial governor. If anyone could help clear Trace's name, it would be Robert Mitchell. Meanwhile, the daily proximity was weaving something deeper between Trace and Zara. It began in small moments, hands brushing while passing dishes at dinner, shared glances across the barn when James wasn't looking, conversations that stretched long into the evening on the porch. Trace found himself telling Zara things he'd never spoken aloud to anyone. About the day his mother left, about his first cattle drive at 16, about the nightmare-filled nights after witnessing the stagecoach murder. In return, she shared her own stories, her dreams of becoming a doctor like her mother, her fears about the isolated life they led, her memories of a childhood spent learning both feminine arts and frontier survival. One evening in late April, as they walked the edge of the newly planted wheat field, Trace realized with startling clarity that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about moving on. Instead, he was watching how the setting sun painted Zara's profile in gold and wondering what it would be like to see that same sight every day for the rest of his life. The thought terrified him. You've gone quiet, Zara observed, glancing at him. Just thinking, he replied. About what? Trace hesitated. About how easy it would be to pretend this is real. That I'm really Travis Nelson, farmhand, with no past coming to claim me. And that would be so terrible. There was a careful neutrality in her voice that didn't quite mask the hurt beneath. No, he said honestly, that's what scares me. How much I want it to be real. Zara stopped walking, turning to face him fully. It could be, not the name perhaps, but the life, once your name is cleared. And if it isn't, Trace challenged gently. If Vickers' influence is too strong and I have to run again. Then we face that when it comes, she said with simple determination. But giving up before we've even tried seems like a poor strategy for a man who survived being shot and left for dead. Trace couldn't help the smile that tugged at his lips. You have an answer for everything, don't you? Not everything, she admitted, but I do know that fear makes for poor decisions and you're afraid right now. Not of Vickers or his men, but of what might happen if you actually got what you wanted. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Trace instinctively stepped in front of Zara, scanning the road for signs of danger. A single rider approached, and as he drew nearer, James emerged from the barn to meet him. There was something in his posture that made both Trace and Zara hurry toward the homestead. Letter for you, the rider, a young boy of perhaps 14, announced as they approached, from Mr. Mitchell in Denver. Pa said to wait for a reply if there is one. James took the envelope, tipping the boy for his trouble before breaking the seal and reading the contents. His expression gave nothing away as his eyes scanned the page. What does it say, Pa? Zara asked when she could stand the suspense no longer. James handed the letter to Trace. Seems you've got a powerful ally, son. The territorial governor is interested in your case. Trace read quickly, his eyes widening. Mitchell's arranged for me to give testimony directly to the governor's investigator, if my account is corroborated by other evidence they've gathered. You could be cleared, Zara finished, hope rising in her voice. Or I could be walking into a trap, Trace cautioned, though he couldn't quite suppress his own surge of hope. If Vickers has men in the governor's office. Robert wouldn't send you into danger, James interrupted. He says in the letter that the governor has personal reasons to want to see the Vickers family's influence diminished, something about a land dispute last year. Trace read further, his brow furrowing. I'd have to go to Denver. Soon? You can't travel alone, Zara said immediately, not with Vickers' men watching the roads. I'll go with him, James decided. 2 men traveling together draw less attention than one. We'll say we're heading to Denver on business, which wouldn't be a lie. And I'm coming too, Zara declared. Both men turned to her with matching expressions of surprise. Absolutely not, her father said firmly. It's too dangerous. A family traveling to visit relatives is even less suspicious than 2 men on business, Zara argued. And if Trace's wound reopens or becomes infected on the journey, neither of you would know how to treat it properly. She has a point, James, Trace said reluctantly. But I don't like putting her in danger. I believe I'm the one who dragged you bleeding into my home, Zara reminded him with a raised eyebrow. I've been in danger since the moment you fell off your horse in our yard. At least this way I have some say in how we face it. James looked between them, noting the stubborn set of his daughter's jaw and the conflicted concern in Trace's eyes. Something unspoken passed between the younger pair that made the father sigh in resignation. We'll leave in 2 days, he finally decided. All 3 of us. The boy can take word back to Robert that we're coming. That night, unable to sleep, Trace stood on the porch watching the moon rise over the eastern hills. The possibility of clearing his name seemed both tantalizingly close and fraught with peril. If they failed, he'd have exposed not only himself but the Abernathys to the full force of Vickers' revenge. The door opened behind him and he knew without turning that it was Zara. You should be resting, she said, echoing words she had spoken to him many times during his recovery. We have a long journey ahead. Too much on my mind, he replied, still gazing at the moon, wondering if I'm doing the right thing bringing you both into this. Zara moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. Do you know what my mother used to say about difficult choices? Trace turned to look at her, silhouetted in the moonlight. What's that? That they're only difficult because we already know the right answer and are trying to talk ourselves out of it. She smiled slightly. She said the heart recognizes truth before the head is willing to accept it. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, Zara's voice softened with memory. She also said that the greatest regrets come not from what we tried and failed, but from what we were too afraid to attempt at all. Trace considered this, watching how the moonlight caught in Zara's hair, turning the rich chestnut to silver and shadow. And what would you regret not attempting, Zara Abernathy? Her eyes met his, unwavering and clear. I would regret not telling you that I believe in you, that regardless of what happens in Denver, I think you are a man worth fighting for. Something tightened in Trace's chest, a feeling both painful and exquisite. Even knowing the danger. Especially knowing the danger, she replied. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. You taught me that when you tried to stop those robbers, when you risked your life for justice. I don't feel very courageous most days, he admitted. Mostly I feel like I'm one misstep away from disaster. Aren't we all? Zara's hand found his on the porch railing, her touch warm and steady. The difference is whether we face that possibility alone or together. Trace looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm upward to clasp hers properly. It was a small gesture, yet it felt momentous, the first time he had reached for connection rather than pulling away from it. Together, then, he said quietly, for however long this journey lasts. They departed for Denver 2 days later, traveling in the Abernathy's wagon with supplies for what would appear to be a family visit. Trace had further altered his appearance, growing a short beard and wearing spectacles that had belonged to Zara's grandfather. With his hat pulled low and shoulders slightly hunched, he bore little resemblance to the wanted poster circulating through the territory. The journey would take 5 days if the weather held. They kept to main roads despite the risk, reasoning that 3 people in a wagon would attract more attention trying to sneak through back country than traveling openly like any family. On the second night they camped by a small creek, the mountains visible as dark shapes against the western horizon. James took first watch while Zara and Trace set up camp and prepared a simple supper. "How's your shoulder?" Zara asked as she stirred the beans heating over the fire. "Stiff from the wagon," Trace admitted, "but the wound itself is almost fully healed. You did fine work, Doc Abernathy." She smiled at the nickname. "I had a cooperative patient, eventually." As they ate, James studied the map by firelight. "We should reach Silver Creek by tomorrow evening. We can get supplies there, maybe hear any news about patrols on the roads ahead." "Is Silver Creek where Ma's people are from?" Zara asked. James nodded. "Your Aunt Margaret still lives there with her husband. We could stay with them a night if you like." "It might be safer for you too," Trace suggested. "I could continue on alone, meet you in Denver." "Not a chance," Zara said firmly. "We started this journey together, we'll finish it the same way." James glanced between them, noting how Trace's expression softened when he looked at Zara. There was something taking root there, something that both worried and relieved the father. If they survived this ordeal, James suspected his daughter's heart would stay with this young cowboy, regardless of the outcome in Denver. "Get some rest," he told them both. "I'll wake you for second watch, Trace." Later, when James had retired to his bedroll and Trace sat keeping watch by the dying fire, Zara joined him instead of sleeping. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders against the night chill and settled beside him on the fallen log. "You should be sleeping," he said softly. "So should you," she countered. "But here we both are." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the creek's gentle murmur and the occasional call of night birds. "Tell me about your home," Zara finally said. "Where you grew up before everything changed." Trace poked at the embers with a stick, stirring up a brief flare of light. "Small ranch in western Texas, nothing grand, but the land was good for cattle. My grandfather built the house with his own hands after coming west from Tennessee." "Do you miss it?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not the way it was at the end, but before that. Summer evenings when Ma would play the piano and Pa would sing. Spring roundups when the whole family worked together." He paused, remembering. "There was an old oak tree behind the house where I built a fort when I was 10. Used to spend whole days up there, watching the ranch like it was my kingdom." Zara smiled, picturing him as a boy. "Do you ever think of going back?" "Wouldn't be much point. Place was sold after Pa died 3 years ago. Some cattle company bought it up, along with half the small ranches in the county." "I'm sorry." Trace shrugged. "It's the way of things out here. Small places get swallowed by bigger ones. Men like Vickers take what they want because they can." "Not always," Zara said. "Sometimes the small and determined win against the big and powerful. Like David and Goliath." "You believe that, really?" "I have to," she replied simply. "Otherwise, what's the point of standing up for anything?" Trace studied her face in the firelight, struck again by the quiet strength behind her gentle demeanor. "You would have made one hell of a doctor, Zara Abernathy." "I still might," she said with a small smile. "Denver has a medical college that recently began accepting women. My mother always dreamed of my attending." "Is that why you agreed to come to Denver, not just for my sake but to see the college?" Zara looked down, slightly embarrassed, perhaps. "Is that terrible of me?" Not at all, Trace said, finding himself charmed by her admission. In fact, while I'm meeting with the governor's man, you should visit the college. See if it's everything your mother hoped for you. That would feel like counting chickens before they hatch, she said uncertainly. We don't know what will happen with your case. All the more reason to seize the opportunity while you can, Trace insisted. Whatever happens to me, Zara, I want you to pursue that dream. You have a gift for healing that shouldn't be wasted. She looked up at him, her expression suddenly vulnerable. And what about your dreams, Trace? Beyond clearing your name, what do you want for your life? The question caught him off guard. For so long, his only goal had been survival, staying one step ahead of trouble. The idea of wanting something more, of building rather than running, felt foreign yet increasingly desirable. I think, he said slowly, I'd like land of my own again, not a big spread, just enough to run some cattle, grow some crops. A place where, he hesitated, the next words dangerous in their implication. Where what? Zara prompted gently. Where a man could put down roots, he finished, his eyes meeting hers. Build something lasting. Something unspoken hung in the air between them, a possibility neither was quite ready to name. Zara's hand found his in the darkness, and they sat together watching the stars, each imagining a future that just days ago had seemed impossible. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of good traveling weather. They broke camp early, hoping to reach Silver Creek by sunset. The road followed the creek for several miles before turning west toward the foothills, and the scenery grew more dramatic as they traveled. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch in the shade of a large cottonwood. James had just gone to refill their canteens from the nearby stream when the sound of approaching riders made Trace tense. Stay calm, he murmured to Zara as 4 horsemen came into view around the bend. Remember, we're just a family traveling to visit relatives. The riders slowed as they approached, and Trace felt his blood run cold as he recognized the leader. It was the false sheriff who had searched the Abernathy homestead. Afternoon, folks, the man called, his friendly tone at odds with the calculating look in his eyes. Fine day for traveling. It is indeed, Trace replied, keeping his voice mild and slightly higher pitched than normal. He busied himself with adjusting the horse's harness, keeping his face partially turned away. Heading to Silver Creek, the man asked, dismounting and approaching the wagon. Just beyond it, Zara answered smoothly. Visiting my mother's sister and her husband. The man nodded, his gaze sweeping over their wagon and supplies before settling on Trace's back. Say, don't I know you from somewhere? Trace turned slowly, careful to maintain his stooped posture and push his spectacles higher on his nose. Don't believe so, sir. I'm not from these parts originally. The false sheriff frowned, studying Trace's bearded face. You look familiar somehow. What did you say your name was? Travis Nelson, Trace supplied, forcing himself to meet the man's gaze without flinching. I work for the Abernathys. James returned with the canteens, his stride casual though Trace could see the tension in his shoulders. Afternoon, gentlemen, can we help you with something? Just making conversation, the leader replied, still watching Trace. Been much trouble on the roads lately, keeping an eye out for strangers. We've had a peaceful journey so far, James said, though we'd like to reach Silver Creek before dark. If you'll excuse us. The false sheriff nodded slowly, backing toward his horse. Of course, safe travels. As the riders moved off, Trace released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They're suspicious, he said quietly once the men were out of earshot, but not certain, James pointed out, otherwise they'd have made a move. They might be waiting for reinforcements, Zara suggested, nervously watching the riders disappear around the bend. Or following to see where we go. Either way, we need to reach Silver Creek as planned, James decided. Margaret's husband is the town marshal. We'll be safer there than on the open road. They traveled the rest of the afternoon in tense silence, each scanning the surroundings for signs of pursuit. The road began to climb as they entered the foothills, offering frequent views back across the valley they had traversed. More than once, Trace spotted dust in the distance that suggested riders following at a discreet distance. Silver Creek came into view just as the sun was setting, a small but prosperous-looking town nestled in a sheltered valley. Buildings lined a main street that followed the creek, with homes and small farms dotting the surrounding hillsides. Margaret's place is on the north edge of town, James informed them as they approached. Ben's position as marshal got them one of the nicer houses. Trace was acutely aware of eyes watching their wagon as they passed through town. In a place this size, strangers were always noticed. He kept his head down, hoping his disguise would hold for just a while longer. Marshal Ben Thompson proved to be a broad-shouldered man with a face weathered by years of frontier life and a handshake firm enough to crush bones. His wife Margaret, Zara's aunt, shared her sister's honey-blonde hair and kind eyes, though she was several inches taller than Zara remembered. After warm embraces for James and Zara, both turned curious gazes to Trace. "And who might you be, young man?" Margaret asked directly. James quickly made introductions, using Trace's alias but giving a meaningful look to his brother-in-law. "Travis has been helping us since I injured my back this spring. Been a godsend around the place." Ben Thompson's shrewd eyes studied Trace for a long moment before he nodded. "Well, any friend of James and Zara is welcome in our home. Come inside, all of you. Supper's waiting, and you can tell us all about your journey." Once inside the comfortable home, with the door firmly closed and curtains drawn, James wasted no time in explaining the true nature of their situation. Ben listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or frowning as the story unfolded. "So you're the young man Stanley Vickers has half the territory hunting," he finally said, addressing Trace directly. "The one who witnessed his son murder a stagecoach driver." Trace nodded, removing his spectacles. "Yes, sir, though the wanted posters tell a different story." Ben rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Vickers has been buying influence across 3 territories for years. Judges, lawmen, newspaper editors, anyone who can help build his empire or keep his family beyond the reach of consequences." "You believe me then?" Trace asked, a note of surprise in his voice. "I've met Randall Vickers," Ben said grimly. "Watched him beat a man nearly to death over a card game 2 years back. His father paid to have the charges dropped, so yes, I believe you saw exactly what you claim." "We had men watching us on the road," James added. "Same ones who came looking for Trace at our homestead. They're suspicious, but I don't think they recognized him." Ben nodded. "Likely they'll come to town asking questions. Silver Creek isn't in Vickers' pocket, not yet, anyway, but a large enough reward would turn heads." "Then we should leave at first light," Trace said. "Continue to Denver." "Not so fast," Ben cautioned. "Rushing off would only confirm their suspicions. Better to stay a day or two. Let me make some inquiries about the road ahead. I have friends who can tell us if Vickers has men watching the approaches to Denver." Margaret, who had been quietly listening while preparing tea, finally spoke up. "In the meantime, you'll all stay here where it's safe. Zara, you can help me with preparations for the Founders' Day celebration. It would look strange if you didn't, being in town." "Founders' Day?" Zara asked. "The day after tomorrow," Margaret explained, "marks the 20th anniversary of Silver Creek's founding. There'll be a gathering in the town square, dancing, food. The whole town attends." Trace frowned. "That could be dangerous. Too many eyes." "Or the perfect cover," Ben countered. "No one questions why strangers are in town during Founders' Day, and it gives me time to arrange a proper escort for your journey to Denver." The decision made, they settled in for the night, with Trace taking a small room at the back of the house that had once belonged to Ben and Margaret's son, now grown and living in San Francisco. Later, as Zara was preparing for bed in the guest room she'd been given, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Margaret standing there with a steaming cup of tea. "Thought you might need this to help you sleep," her aunt said, entering and closing the door behind her. "It's been quite a journey already, hasn't it?" Zara accepted the tea gratefully. "Thank you." "And yes, it has." Margaret settled on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her in invitation. When Zara joined her, the older woman studied her niece's face carefully. "So," she said after a moment, "are you going to tell me about you and the young cowboy, or do I have to pry it out of you?" Zara nearly choked on her tea. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't," Margaret said dryly. "That's why you've hardly taken your eyes off him since you arrived, and why he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Heat rose to Zara's cheeks. "It's not. We haven't." "I'm not suggesting anything improper," her aunt assured her. "Just observing that there seems to be a certain understanding between you." Zara stared into her tea, unsure how to explain feelings she herself was still coming to terms with. "He's a good man," she finally said, "better than he believes himself to be." "The best ones often are," Margaret noted with a small smile. "Your uncle included. When I first met Ben, he was convinced he had nothing to offer a woman like me. Too rough, too poor, too damaged by the war." "What changed his mind?" "I did," Margaret said simply. Sometimes a man needs to borrow our faith in him until he finds his own. Zara considered this, thinking of Trace's determination to face the governor's investigator despite the risks. I believe in him, she said softly. I just don't know if it will be enough if we can clear his name. And if you can't, Margaret asked gently, what then? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications Zara had been avoiding. I don't know, she admitted. He talks about moving on, finding somewhere beyond Vickers' reach. And would you go with him if he asked? Zara looked up, startled by the directness of the question. He hasn't asked. But if he did, Margaret pressed. Zara hesitated, the truth rising unbidden to her lips. Yes, I would go with him. Her aunt nodded, seemingly unsurprised. Your mother would understand, you know. She followed her heart when she married your father, left behind the life that had been planned for her. But what about Pa? I can't just abandon him. Your father wants your happiness above all else, Margaret assured her. Just as my sister did. Why do you think he brought you on this journey, knowing the dangers? He sees what's growing between you and Trace. Zara set her tea aside, suddenly overwhelmed by the possibilities before her. Everything is happening so fast. A month ago, Trace was a stranger bleeding on our doorstep. Now I can't imagine. Life rarely gives us the luxury of perfect timing, Margaret said, patting her niece's hand. Especially out here, we seize the chances for happiness when they come, or we watch them ride away and wonder what might have been. Downstairs, a similar conversation was taking place between the men. Ben had poured whiskey for himself, James, and Trace, and they sat in the study discussing the situation in low voices. Governor Rout is no friend to the Vickers family, Ben was saying. Last year, Vickers tried to pressure him into granting exclusive water rights to a creek that runs through several small ranches. Rout refused, said the water belonged to all who lived along it. So he might be sympathetic to my case, Trace asked. More than sympathetic, Ben confirmed. His investigator Harmon has been building a case against the Vickers family for months. Your testimony could be the key piece he needs. James swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Assuming we can get Trace to Denver safely. I have a plan for that, Ben said, leaning forward. 2 of my deputies are riding to Denver the day after Founders Day, official business, escorting a prisoner to the territorial court. You 3 will travel with them. Won't that attract attention? Trace asked skeptically. Less than you might think, Ben replied. The prisoner is Lawrence Miller, a forger we caught last month. Not a dangerous man, but having deputies along will discourage any interference with your journey. Trace nodded slowly, seeing the logic, and in the meantime, you're Travis Nelson, family friend of the Abernathys, in town for Founders Day like dozens of other visitors, Ben said firmly. You keep your head down, stick to your story, and let me handle any questions. After James retired for the night, Trace remained with Ben, nursing his whiskey while the marshal cleaned his service revolver at the desk. Something on your mind, son? Ben asked without looking up from his task. Trace hesitated, then decided honesty was his best approach with this man. Your niece, he admitted. I'm concerned about the danger I've brought to her door. Ben's hands stilled and he looked up with a piercing gaze. Just her door or her heart as well? The direct question caught Trace off guard. I care for her, he said carefully. More than I should, given the circumstances. Circumstances have a way of changing, Ben observed. The question is, what are your intentions if they do, if your name is cleared and you're a free man again? I haven't let myself think that far ahead, Trace admitted. Seems like tempting fate. Ben set his revolver aside and leaned back in his chair, studying the younger man. Let me ask you something, Norwood. What made you report what you saw that day? Why not just ride on, pretend you never witnessed the murder? The question struck at something fundamental, something Trace had asked himself during many sleepless nights. Because it was wrong, he said simply. And if no one stands against wrong when they see it, then what kind of world are we building out here? Ben nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. That's a man talking, not a boy. A man who understands that some things are worth the risk. He leaned forward. My niece is one of those things, Norwood. She deserves someone who will stand beside her, not ride away when the trail gets rough. I know that, Trace said quietly. And I wouldn't ask her to tie her future to mine, unless I could offer her more than a life of looking over our shoulders. Good, Ben said, seemingly satisfied, because I'd hate to have to hunt you down if you broke her heart. Despite the implied threat, There was something like acceptance in the marshal's tone that eased a weight Trace hadn't realized he was carrying. The following day passed in a blur of preparation for Founders' Day. Margaret enlisted Zara's help with baking and decorating, while Ben took Trace and James to meet the deputies who would escort them to Denver. Deputy Samuel Wright was a stocky, red-headed man with an infectious laugh and quick reflexes that belied his jovial appearance. His partner, Deputy Michael Coleman, was taller and more reserved, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Both men treated Trace with respectful curiosity after Ben explained the situation. "Vickers has had this coming for a long time," Wright said, shaking Trace's hand firmly. "Be an honor to help you reach Denver safely." "Just remember," Coleman added, "until we're on the road, you're Travis Nelson visiting for Founders' Day." Nothing more. As they were leaving the marshal's office, Trace noticed a group of riders entering town. His blood chilled as he recognized the false sheriff among them. "They're here," he murmured to Ben. The marshal nodded slightly. "Expected as much. Keep walking normally. They don't know I know the truth." As they passed the group of riders, the false sheriff's eyes locked with Trace's for a brief, tense moment. Trace nodded politely and continued walking, fighting the urge to quicken his pace or touch the revolver hidden beneath his coat. "He recognizes me," Trace said once they were out of earshot. "Not enough to be sure, but he suspects." "Then we move up our timetable," Ben decided. "You'll leave tomorrow evening after the celebration begins. Everyone will be in the town square for the dancing and fireworks. Perfect time to slip away unnoticed." That evening, as the household prepared for supper, Trace found a moment alone with Zara in the garden behind the house. She was cutting fresh herbs for the meal, and he watched her for a moment before speaking. "Your uncle's arranged for us to leave tomorrow night," he told her quietly, "during the celebration." Zara straightened, turning to face him with the herbs clutched in her hand. "So soon? I thought we were staying through Founders' Day." "The men who followed us are in town," Trace explained. "Ben thinks it's safer to leave while everyone's distracted by the festivities." "I see." She looked down at the herbs in her hand, then back up at him. "Are you afraid?" The question surprised him. "Of what?" "Of what happens after Denver," she said. "If your name is cleared and you're free to choose your path forward." Trace took a step closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes. "I've spent so long running, I'm not sure I remember how to stay still," he admitted, "but I'm beginning to think I might want to learn." Zara's breath caught. "And where would you want to stay still if you could?" "Wherever there's honest work to be done," he said softly. "Good land to tend, and people worth staying for." The last words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to speak aloud. Zara's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked down at the herbs in her hand. "The medical college in Denver," she said. "If we have time, I'd still like to see it." "I hope you do," Trace replied. "And I hope whatever you decide about it, it's because it's what you want, not what anyone else wants for you." Zara looked up at him again, a small smile touching her lips. "Even my mother." "Even her," he confirmed, "though I suspect she'd want you to follow your heart, whatever direction it leads." "And what about you?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What would you want for me?" Trace reached out slowly, taking her free hand in his. It was the boldest gesture he had yet made, and he felt her fingers tremble slightly before steadying in his grasp. "I want you to have the chance to become everything you're capable of being," he said honestly. "Whether that's a doctor in Denver or whatever else you might choose." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibilities. Trace found himself leaning slightly forward, drawn by something beyond conscious thought. Zara's eyes widened, but she didn't pull away. "Zara," Margaret's voice called from the house, "is that rosemary ready?" The spell broken, they stepped apart, Zara's cheeks flushed. "Coming, Aunt Margaret," she called back, her voice only slightly unsteady. As she turned to go, Trace caught her hand once more. "Zara," he said quietly, "when this is over, when we're safe. There's something I need to tell you." She nodded, her eyes searching his. "I'll hold you to that, Trace Norwood." Then she was gone, hurrying back to the house with her gathered herbs, leaving Trace alone in the garden with thoughts that for once weren't of danger or escape, but of possibilities he had long since stopped believing he deserved. Founders' Day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect early summer day that seemed designed for celebration. By mid-morning, the town square was transformed with bunting and banners, tables laden with food, and a wooden platform for the musicians who would play for dancing later. As Margaret had predicted, visitors streamed into Silver Creek from surrounding homesteads and farms. The crowded streets provided excellent cover, but also increased the risk of Trace being recognized among so many eyes. He remained close to the Thompson house through most of the day, helping with final preparations while Ben kept tabs on the false sheriff and his men. By mid-afternoon, Ben returned with news. "They're asking questions all over town," he reported to the small group gathered in his study. "Offering rewards for information about a wounded man traveling with a family. So far, no one's connected you to the description, but it's only a matter of time." "Then we stick to the plan," James said firmly. "Leave during the fireworks tonight." Ben nodded. "The deputies will meet you at the livery stable at 9 o'clock. They've arranged for fresh horses, faster than continuing with the wagon." "What about our things?" Zora asked. "Pack only what you absolutely need," Margaret advised. "One small bag each. I'll send the rest on to Denver when it's safe." As dusk approached, the family dressed for the celebration. Trace felt distinctly uncomfortable in the borrowed suit Ben had provided, but admitted it completed his disguise effectively. No one would look for a wanted cowboy in a gentleman's attire. When Zara emerged from her room, however, all thoughts of disguises fled his mind. She wore a dress of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, her chestnut hair arranged in an elegant style he hadn't seen before. For a moment she looked like she belonged in a Denver parlor rather than a frontier homestead. "You look," he began, then faltered, unable to find words adequate to the transformation before him. "Different," she supplied with a small smile. "Beautiful," he finished honestly, "though you always do." The simple compliment brought color to her cheeks, and a softness to her eyes that made Trace's heart beat faster. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different scenario, escorting her to the celebration as a proper suitor, dancing under the stars without the shadow of danger hanging over them. The fantasy was short-lived as Ben entered, his expression grave. "Change of plans," he said without preamble. "Vickers' men are watching the livery stable. They've somehow connected you to us, though I don't think they're certain yet." "So what do we do?" James asked. "We still attend the celebration," Ben decided. "All of us. Being conspicuously absent would only confirm their suspicions, but we'll need another way out of town." "What about the Creek Road?" Margaret suggested. "Samuel could bring horses to the old mill." "It's deserted this time of year." Ben considered this. "That might work. I'll get word to the deputies. In the meantime, we proceed as if nothing has changed. We go to the square, eat, dance, enjoy ourselves like any other family on Founder's Day." The town square was already filling with people when they arrived. Lanterns hung from trees cast a warm glow over the festivities, and the band was playing a lively tune that had several couples dancing on the temporary wooden floor laid out for the occasion. "Stay close," Ben murmured as they made their way through the crowd. "I've spotted 3 of Vickers' men near the general store." Trace offered his arm to Zara, who took it with a grateful smile. Together they followed Ben and Margaret toward the refreshment tables, with James walking slightly behind them. To any observer, they appeared to be nothing more than a family enjoying the celebration. As the evening progressed, Trace found himself relaxing slightly despite the danger. The music, the laughter, the sense of community, it all reminded him of happier times from his childhood before the war had changed everything. When the band struck up a waltz, Margaret nudged Zara gently. "You should dance with Travis," she said, using Trace's alias for the benefit of nearby listeners. "It's tradition to dance at least once on Founder's Day." Zara glanced at Trace, a question in her eyes. He hesitated only briefly before offering his hand. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Abernathy?" She placed her hand in his, and he led her to the dance floor, acutely conscious of both Ben's watchful gaze and the way Zara's dress rustled softly as she moved. "I should warn you," he said quietly as he took her in his arms, careful to maintain a proper distance, "I haven't danced in years." "Just follow the music," she replied, "and try not to look so terrified. People will think I'm leading you to your execution, not a waltz." The gentle teasing had its intended effect, and Trace felt some of his tension ease. He guided her into the steps of the dance, finding that his body remembered what his mind had forgotten. They moved together with a natural harmony that surprised them both. "You dance well for a man who claims to be out of practice," Zara observed. "My mother insisted I learn," he explained, guiding her through a turn. "Said no son of hers would embarrass himself at social gatherings." "She would be proud," Zara said softly. As they continued to dance, Trace became increasingly aware of how right it felt to hold Zara in his arms, even in this formal, public way. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking beyond the next day, the next week, imagining a future that included more moments like this, more evenings spent in her company. The realization both exhilarated and terrified him. The waltz ended too soon, and as they returned to where Ben and the others waited, Trace noticed a sudden tension in the marshal's posture. "What is it?" he asked quietly as they rejoined the group. "The false sheriff," Ben murmured. "He's watching us, has been since you started dancing." Trace resisted the urge to look around. "Does he recognize me?" "Hard to say. But we need to move up our departure. When the fireworks start in 20 minutes, we slip away. One at a time, casual-like, meet at the mill as planned." The next 20 minutes stretched endlessly as they maintained their charade of enjoying the celebration. Trace accepted a cup of punch from Margaret, making a show of sipping it while scanning the crowd from beneath the brim of his hat. He spotted the false sheriff near the band platform, indeed watching their group with poorly disguised interest. When the first firework exploded overhead, drawing all eyes skyward, Ben gave the signal. James departed first, casually walking toward the edge of the square as if heading for the outhouse. 5 minutes later, Margaret followed, taking a different path. "You next," Ben told Zara. "Head toward my office like you're going to freshen up. There's a back door that leads to the alley behind." Zara nodded, squeezing Trace's hand briefly before walking away. The touch lingered on his skin as he watched her disappear into the crowd. "Now you," Ben said after another firework burst overhead. "I'll create a distraction if needed." Trace moved off in yet another direction, forcing himself to walk unhurriedly despite the urge to run. He kept his head slightly down, using the brim of his hat to shield his face from casual observation. He had almost reached the edge of the square when a voice called out behind him. "You there?" "Nelson." Trace froze, then slowly turned to find the false sheriff pushing through the crowd toward him. The man's hand hovered near his holstered pistol. "Something I can help you with?" Trace asked, keeping his voice even despite the pounding of his heart. The false sheriff reached him, eyes narrowed in scrutiny. "Where you heading? Celebration's just getting started." "Nature calls," Trace replied with a forced smile, "even on Founder's Day." For a long, tense moment, the false sheriff studied his face. Trace waited, knowing that running would only confirm the man's suspicions. "You know," the false sheriff finally said, "you remind me powerfully of someone." "I have that kind of face," Trace responded calmly. "My mother always said I looked like half the men in her hometown." Another firework exploded overhead, momentarily distracting the false sheriff. When he looked back, his expression had hardened. "I think you're—" He never finished the sentence. Ben appeared suddenly beside them, clapping a heavy hand on the false sheriff's shoulder. "Edwards, just the man I wanted to see," the marshal said heartily. "Got a telegram today you should know about. From the real Sheriff Porter in Junction City." The blood drained from the false sheriff's face. "What are you talking about, Thompson?" "Seems there's no deputy by the name of Edwards working for Porter," Ben continued, his friendly tone belied by the steel in his eyes. "Interesting, don't you think? Why don't we discuss it in my office?" Ben's free hand moved to rest meaningfully on his holstered revolver. The false sheriff hesitated, clearly calculating his odds. "Go," Ben said to Trace, not taking his eyes off Edwards. "We have our dance later." Trace didn't need to be told twice. He slipped away as Ben firmly steered Edwards toward the marshal's office. Once out of sight of the square, Trace broke into a run, heading for the old mill on the creek road. The abandoned mill stood silhouetted against the night sky, its water wheel silent for years. As Trace approached, he saw horses tethered in the shadows, 6 of them already saddled and ready. Inside, he found James, Zara, and deputies Wright and Coleman waiting anxiously. "Where's Ben?" James asked as soon as Trace entered. "Creating a diversion," Trace explained quickly. "The false sheriff Edwards recognized me. Ben intervened, took him to the office." "Then we need to move," Wright decided. "Marshal Thompson can handle himself, but those other men will notice their leader's absence soon enough." "What about Aunt Margaret?" Zara asked. "Already on her way back to the house," Coleman assured her. "She'll be safe there." "Marshal's deputies will keep watch." They moved quickly to the horses, Trace helping Zara mount before swinging into his own saddle. The animal was a fine bay gelding, clearly chosen for both speed and endurance. "We'll take the old mining road," Wright instructed as they prepared to depart. It joins the main Denver road about 10 miles north. Hard riding, but it should put us well ahead of any pursuit. Just as they were about to leave, the mill door opened. Trace drew his revolver, then immediately holstered it again as Ben Thompson stepped inside. Edwards is locked in a cell, the marshal reported. His friends are still watching the fireworks, but that won't last long. You're coming with us? James asked in surprise. Ben nodded grimly. All the way to Denver. These men work for Vickers, not the law. They won't hesitate to kill all of you to silence the only witness against Randall Vickers. You'll need every gun you can get. With no time to argue, they set out, keeping a steady pace along the narrow trail that followed the creek before climbing into the hills above Silver Creek. The moon provided enough light to navigate, but the terrain was challenging, forcing them to ride in single file. Trace found himself in the middle of their small procession, with Zara just ahead of him and James behind. Despite the danger of their situation, he felt a strange sense of purpose he had lacked during his weeks of running alone. Now he wasn't just fleeing for his own survival, he was fighting for a chance at justice, and perhaps something more. They had been riding for nearly 2 hours when Wright, who was leading, suddenly raised his hand for them to halt. The deputy dismounted and crouched, studying the trail ahead. "Riders," he said quietly when the others gathered around. 4, maybe 5, moving fast toward us. Could be anyone, Coleman suggested. Miners heading to their claims, maybe. Ben shook his head. Not at this hour, not on this trail, it's them. Edwards must have had a way to alert his men, even from a cell. What do we do? Zara asked, her voice steady despite the fear Trace could see in her eyes. We can't outrun them on this narrow trail. Ben considered their options. There's an abandoned mine shaft about half a mile ahead, cuts through the mountain, comes out near Elk Creek. We could lose them there. Or be trapped with no way out, James pointed out. It's a risk, Ben acknowledged, but less of one than facing them in the open. The decision made, they continued forward at a quicker pace, the sound of pursuit growing steadily closer behind them. The mine entrance, when they reached it, was partially obscured by overgrowth, a dark maw in the mountainside that seemed to swallow the moonlight. We'll have to go in on foot, Wright said, dismounting. Lead the horses. It's too low for riding in some places. What if they follow us in? Zara asked as Trace helped her down from her horse. They'll have to come single file, Ben explained, producing a small lantern from his saddlebag and lighting it. Gives us the advantage if it comes to a fight. The mine tunnel was dank and narrow, forcing them to walk hunched over in places. The lantern cast eerie shadows against the rough-hewn walls, and the sound of water dripping echoed in the darkness ahead. Their horses, clearly unhappy with the confined space, required constant reassurance. They had gone perhaps 200 yards into the mountain when they heard voices at the entrance behind them. Tracks lead in here, a man's voice called. They went into the old Silverton mine. Fools, another voice replied. That tunnel collapsed last spring, there's no way through. Trace exchanged alarmed looks with Ben. Collapsed, he whispered. Ben frowned. It was passable last time I came this way, but that was months ago. Do we turn back? James asked. Try to fight our way out. We go forward, Ben decided. Even if there's a collapse, we might be able to clear enough space to get through, and they might not follow if they believe it's impassable. They continued deeper into the mine, the air growing thicker with dust and the tunnel narrowing further. After another 100 yards, the lantern light revealed what they had feared, a partial collapse with rocks and timbers blocking most of the passage. There, Coleman said, pointing to a small opening near the top of the collapse, might be big enough to squeeze through. Ben handed the lantern to Wright and approached the barrier, examining the opening. It's tight, but I think we can make it. We'll have to leave the horses, though. Leave them, Zara echoed, but how will we? The sound of voices growing closer cut her off. Their pursuers had decided to follow after all. No time to argue, Ben said firmly. Samuel, you go first, then Zara, James, Trace, Michael, I'll come last. Wright quickly removed his saddlebags and handed them to Coleman before scrambling up the pile of debris. He squeezed through the opening with some difficulty, then called back softly, It's clear on this side. Tunnel continues. One by one, they followed, Trace helping Zara climb the unstable pile before making his own ascent. The opening was barely wide enough for his shoulders, and for a terrifying moment he thought he might become stuck. Then he was through, sliding down the other side to join the others in the continuing tunnel. Coleman came next, then finally Ben, who barely made it through before part of the debris shifted, making the opening even smaller. That should slow them down, Ben said grimly, reclaiming the lantern. Let's move. They continued forward, the tunnel gradually widening again until they could walk upright. The air grew fresher, suggesting they were approaching another exit. What about the horses? Zara asked, concern evident in her voice. Will they be safe? Edwards and his men will probably take them, Ben admitted, but horses can be replaced, lives can't. After what seemed like hours but was likely less than one, they saw moonlight filtering through an opening ahead. The exit of the mine tunnel opened onto a small plateau overlooking a different valley, with the silver ribbon of Elk Creek visible below. We made it, Wright said, relief evident in his voice. Elk Creek settlement is about 5 miles that way. We can get fresh horses there. If Edwards and his men don't reach it first, Trace pointed out. They might circle around once they realize we got through the collapse. Ben nodded in agreement. We need to move fast, stay off the main trails. Denver is still 30 miles away. The night that followed was one of the longest in Trace's memory. They made their way down from the plateau on foot, following game trails through the thick forest. The moon provided enough light to navigate, but the going was slow and treacherous, with loose rocks and exposed roots threatening to trip them at every step. Zara maintained a steady pace despite her impractical dress and town shoes, never complaining even when Trace could see the fatigue in her face. Her determination only increased his admiration for her resilience. Dawn found them approaching the small settlement of Elk Creek, little more than a trading post, livery stable, and a few scattered cabins. They paused in the cover of the trees, surveying the quiet buildings for any sign of Edwards and his men. Looks clear, Ben finally said, but we approach carefully. Samuel, Michael circle around to the livery. James, you and I will check the trading post. Trace, you and Zara wait here. If there's trouble, head west toward the territorial road. The others moved out, leaving Trace and Zara alone in the shelter of the pines. She sank gratefully onto a fallen log, her exhaustion finally showing. Are you all right? Trace asked softly, sitting beside her. Just tired, she assured him with a wan smile, and worried about Pa. Your father is with Ben, Trace reminded her. They'll be fine. Zara nodded, then looked at him directly. What happens when we reach Denver, really? The question caught him off guard. I give my testimony. If the governor's investigator believes me, they might bring charges against Randall Vickers. And if they don't? Trace hesitated, unwilling to voice the fear that had haunted him throughout their journey. Then I keep running, head north maybe. Montana Territory or even Canada, somewhere beyond Vickers' reach. I see. Zara looked away, her profile silhouetted against the early morning light. And is that what you want? To keep running. What I want, Trace said carefully, is a chance to stop running, to build something instead of always looking over my shoulder. He paused, gathering his courage. But I won't ask anyone to share that uncertainty with me. It wouldn't be fair. Zara turned back to him, something fierce in her gaze. Shouldn't that be my choice to make, or do you still not trust me to know my own mind? Before Trace could respond, they heard voices approaching, Ben and the others returning from the settlement. All clear, Ben reported, and better yet, the morning stage to Denver leaves in an hour. We've booked passage. The stage, Trace questioned, isn't that risky? Less risky than continuing on foot, Coleman pointed out. Edwards and his men will be looking for riders or people moving cross-country, not passengers on the regular stage. And I wired ahead to Denver, Ben added. Harmon, the governor's investigator, will meet us at the station. You'll be under official protection the moment we arrive. The plan made sense, though Trace couldn't shake his uneasiness. Every previous attempt to seek protection from authorities had ended in betrayal and flight. But he had no better alternative to offer, and the others had already risked too much on his behalf. An hour later, they were aboard the Denver-bound stage, a sturdy Concord coach drawn by 6 fresh horses. The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple returning from visiting family, paid little attention to the new additions, though the woman offered Zara a sympathetic smile when she saw her trail-worn appearance. Quite an adventure you've had, dear, she commented, traveling through the night by the looks of it. Family emergency, Zara explained smoothly. We're eager to reach Denver as quickly as possible. The stage departed on schedule, rolling out of Elk Creek at a brisk pace. Ben and the deputies maintained a vigilant watch through the windows, but the road remained clear of pursuers as morning gave way to afternoon. Beside him, Trace felt Zara gradually relax as the miles passed uneventfully, until her head drooped against his shoulder as she succumbed to exhaustion. He remained still, unwilling to disturb her rest, and found himself studying her face in repose, the delicate arch of her brows, the small freckle near her temple that he hadn't noticed before, the way her lashes lay against her cheeks. In that moment, with the rhythmic sway of the stagecoach and the warm weight of her head on his shoulder, Trace allowed himself to imagine a different future than the one he had resigned himself to. Not a life of endless running, but one of purpose and connection, a home, perhaps land of his own, and Zara if she would have him by his side. The stage rolled into Denver just as the sun was setting, the city's buildings silhouetted against the fiery sky. True to Ben's message, a group of men waited at the stage depot, led by a tall, distinguished-looking gentleman with a neatly trimmed beard. Marshal Thompson, the man greeted Ben as they disembarked. "I'm William Harmon, Special Investigator for Governor Rout. I understand you've brought me a witness of considerable importance." Ben nodded, indicating Trace, Thomas Norwood, the only witness to Randall Vickers' murder of a stagecoach driver 3 months ago. Harmon extended his hand to Trace. "Mr. Norwood, the governor has been most interested in your case. We've arranged secure accommodations for you and your companions at the Denver Hotel, with guards posted. Tomorrow morning, if you're willing, I'd like to hear your full account of what happened." The Denver Hotel proved to be the finest establishment Trace had ever entered. Their group was escorted to a private wing, with separate rooms for each of them and an armed guard stationed in the hallway. "The governor takes your safety seriously," Harmon explained as they settled in. "Stanley Vickers may have influence, but he's not above the law, not in Denver at any rate." After arranging to meet the following morning, Harmon departed, leaving them to rest and recover from their journey. James and Ben went to send telegrams to Silver Creek, informing Margaret of their safe arrival, while the deputies left to report to the Denver marshal. Trace found himself alone in a room more luxurious than any he had occupied in years. The bed was soft, the wash basin filled with hot water, and clean clothes had been provided. After washing away the dust of travel and changing, he stood at the window watching the city lights below, still struggling to believe they had reached Denver safely. A soft knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Zara standing there, similarly refreshed, her hair loose around her shoulders and her borrowed dress a simple calico that somehow suited her better than the finer one from Founder's Day. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. "I know it's not proper, but—" Trace hesitated, acutely aware of how improper it was indeed, but unable to deny her request. He stepped aside, leaving the door conspicuously open as she entered. "Your father would have my hide," he said with a small attempt at humor. "My father is asleep," Zara replied, moving to stand by the window where he had been moments before. "First real sleep he's had in days, I imagine." "You should be resting too," Trace said, maintaining a respectful distance. "I tried." She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability that made his heart ache. "But I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation in Elk Creek. The one we didn't finish." Trace swallowed hard, suddenly nervous in a way that had nothing to do with Vickers or danger. "Zara, you said you wouldn't ask anyone to share your uncertainty," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "But I'm not just anyone, Trace, and I'm not asking for certainty. No one has that, not really." "What are you asking for then?" he managed to say. "Honesty." She took a step toward him. "Tell me honestly, if your name is cleared tomorrow, if you're free to choose your path forward, what do you want?" The question hung between them, demanding an answer that Trace had been avoiding even in the privacy of his own thoughts. But standing here, looking into Zara's earnest face, he found he couldn't evade it any longer. "I want a life that means something," he said finally. "Land to work, a home to build. And," he paused, gathering his courage, "someone to share it with, someone who sees me not as the man I've been, but as the man I could be." "And if that someone were me," Zara asked softly, her cheeks flushed but her gaze steady, "would you still try to convince me I'd be better off without you?" Trace closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Zara Abernathy," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you deserve better than a man with nothing to his name but trouble. But if you're foolish enough to want me anyway, I'm not strong enough to send you away." A smile bloomed across her face, radiant as sunrise. "Then it's settled. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." The simplicity of her declaration, the absolute certainty in her voice, left Trace momentarily speechless. Before he could respond, footsteps in the hallway reminded them of the impropriety of their situation. I should go, Zara said reluctantly, though she made no move to release his hands. Yes, Trace agreed, equally reluctant. Then, in a moment of boldness, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. But thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Zara's eyes softened. That's what love does, Trace. It believes even when evidence suggests otherwise. She slipped away then, leaving him standing at the window with the ghost of her touch on his hands and the word love echoing in his mind like a promise. The following morning found Trace, James, Zara, and Ben gathered in a private dining room with William Harmon, and another man introduced as Judge Henry Parker of the Territorial Court. Over breakfast, Trace recounted everything he had witnessed on the day of the stagecoach robbery, Randall Vickers and his men stopping the coach, the driver's resistance, the fatal shot fired by Vickers himself, and Trace's subsequent attempt to help the dying man. I promised him I'd see justice done, Trace concluded. That's why I reported what I saw to the sheriff in Willow Creek. I didn't know then that he was in Vickers' pocket. Harmon and Judge Parker exchanged meaningful glances. Your account matches evidence we've gathered from other sources, Harmon said, including the stagecoach guard who survived the robbery but was too badly injured to identify the perpetrators at the time. He's recovered, Trace asked in surprise. Sufficiently to corroborate key details of your story, the judge confirmed. And there's more. The false Sheriff Edwards you encountered was apprehended this morning trying to enter Denver. Under questioning, he admitted that Stanley Vickers personally ordered your elimination to protect his son. Then you believe me, Trace said, the realization washing over him like cool water after a long thirst. My name can be cleared. More than that, Harmon said. Governor Rout has issued warrants for the arrest of both Randall and Stanley Vickers on multiple charges, including murder, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and corruption of public officials. A detachment of cavalry left for the Vickers ranch at dawn. Ben let out a low whistle. That's going to cause quite a stir in the territory. It's long overdue, Judge Parker said firmly. The Vickers family has operated above the law for years. Your testimony, Mr. Norwood, provided the final evidence needed to act. What happens now? James asked. Is Trace still in danger? Until the Vickers are in custody, yes, Harmon acknowledged. But the governor has authorized me to offer you protection for as long as necessary. And there will be a reward, of course, for information leading to their arrest. Reward, Trace repeated, startled by the notion. $500, the judge specified. Standard for information leading to the apprehension of murderers in the territory. The sum was staggering to Trace, who had rarely possessed more than $20 at any time in recent years. It was enough to buy land, livestock to make a proper start. What will you do with it? Zara asked later, as they walked together in the hotel garden under the watchful eye of a discreet guard. Trace was still processing the morning's revelations, still adjusting to the idea that his long flight might truly be over. I hadn't thought that far ahead, he admitted. Land, I suppose. Somewhere I could raise cattle, grow crops. Where? She pressed gently. He looked at her, then really looked at her, taking in the hope and uncertainty mingled in her expression. That depends, he said carefully. On what? On whether I'd be settling there alone. Trace stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Zara, last night you spoke of love. Did you mean it? I did, she answered without hesitation, her cheeks coloring but her gaze steady. I do. Then I need to ask you something, he said, his heart pounding as if he were facing down Vickers himself rather than this slip of a woman who had somehow become the center of his world. Something I have no right to ask, but can't leave unspoken any longer. Zara waited, her eyes never leaving his face. When this is all over, Trace continued, forcing the words past the tightness in his throat, when the Vickers are behind bars and my name is cleared. Would you consider becoming my wife? The moment the question left his lips, Trace felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. For so long, he had denied himself even the dream of such happiness, convinced he was destined to remain alone. Now, having spoken the words, he found himself holding his breath, waiting for her answer as if his life depended on it. Zara's face transformed, joy illuminating her features like sunshine breaking through clouds. Yes, she said, the single word ringing with certainty. Yes, I would consider it. Yes, I accept. Before Trace could respond, she had stepped closer, rising on her toes to press her lips gently against his. The kiss was brief, proper enough should anyone be watching, yet it sealed a promise between them more binding than any contract. When she drew back, Trace found himself smiling more freely than he had in years. Your father might have something to say about this, he pointed out. My father has been watching you for weeks, Zara replied with a small laugh. He knows your character better than most. And I think he suspected this was coming before either of us did. As if conjured by their conversation, James appeared in the garden doorway, accompanied by Ben and William Harmon. The serious expressions they wore immediately dampened Trace's newfound joy. What's happened? He asked as they approached. We've received word from the cavalry, Harmon explained grimly. The Vickers ranch was abandoned when they arrived. Stanley and Randall Vickers, along with most of their men, fled sometime yesterday. How is that possible? Ben demanded. How did they know we were coming? They must have informants in Denver, Harmon acknowledged. The governor is investigating who might have leaked the information. In the meantime, I'm afraid you're all still in danger, more so perhaps as Stanley Vickers has nothing left to lose. The news settled over them like a dark cloud, dimming the brightness of the future that had seemed so clear just moments before. What do we do now? James asked, placing a protective hand on Zara's shoulder. We continue with the plan to take Mr. Norwood's formal deposition this afternoon, Harmon said. That will allow Judge Parker to issue the official warrant clearing his name of all charges. Beyond that, I recommend you remain under protection until the Vickers are apprehended. And if they're not? Trace asked quietly. Harmon had no answer for that. That afternoon, in Judge Parker's chambers, Trace gave his formal deposition, signing the document that would officially clear his name of all charges related to the stagecoach robbery and murder. It should have been a moment of triumph, of closure, but the knowledge that the Vickers were still free cast a pall over the proceedings. As they left the courthouse, Trace noticed a man watching them from across the street, a thin, wiry individual who ducked into an alley when he realized he'd been spotted. We're being watched, Trace murmured to Ben, who immediately signaled to their guards. Two of the men moved to investigate, but by the time they reached the alley, the observer had vanished. The incident only reinforced the reality that despite being in Denver, despite having the support of the territorial governor, they were not truly safe. That evening, as they gathered for dinner in the hotel's private dining room, Harmon joined them with news. The cavalry captured 3 of Vickers' men at a way station near the Wyoming border, he reported. They've revealed that Stanley and Randall are heading for Canada, where Stanley has business interests. The governor has wired ahead to alert authorities at the border, but they might slip through, Trace finished when Harmon hesitated. It's possible, the investigator conceded. The border is vast with many crossing points. So we could be looking over our shoulders forever, James said heavily. Not necessarily, Harmon replied. Even if they escape to Canada, the charges against them won't disappear. They'll be fugitives unable to return to their holdings in Colorado. Their assets here will be seized, their power effectively ended. Cold comfort if they send men back to settle scores, Ben pointed out. The conversation continued in this vein, weighing risks and possibilities, until Trace found himself unable to bear it any longer. He excused himself, stepping out onto the hotel's veranda for air. He stood there in the cool evening breeze, watching the city lights below and feeling the weight of uncertainty press down upon him once more. The brief joy of having his name cleared, of Zara's acceptance of his proposal, both now overshadowed by the reality that the danger had not truly passed. The soft sound of the door opening behind him announced Zara's presence before her hand touched his arm. You're worried, she said. It wasn't a question. Thinking, he corrected gently. About what comes next. And what does come next, Trace? He turned to face her, struck again by the quiet strength in her gaze. I don't know, he admitted. I want to believe this is over, that we can move forward without looking back, but as long as the Vickers are free. We adapt, Zara said simply. We take precautions, we stay alert. But we don't let fear dictate our choices. And if I wanted to take you far away from here, Trace asked, somewhere beyond Vickers' reach or interest. Zara considered this. You mean Oregon, California? Maybe. Or north to Montana territory. I hear the Gallatin Valley is good cattle country. Then we would go, she said with the same certainty she had shown when accepting his proposal. Together. The simple declaration eased something tight in Trace's chest. What about your medical studies, Denver's college? There will be other opportunities, Zara replied. Other colleges eventually. And in the meantime, frontier settlements always need people with healing knowledge. She smiled slightly. I've never been one to believe happiness can only be found in one particular place or path. Before Trace could respond, the veranda door opened again, revealing James and Ben. There you are, James said, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Harmon's gone, I think we need to talk. The four of them settled at a small table near the veranda railing. For a moment no one spoke, each waiting for another to begin. I saw you in the garden earlier, James finally said, looking directly at Trace, with my daughter. Trace straightened, meeting the older man's gaze. Sir, I was planning to speak with you directly, but events overtook us. I've asked Zara to marry me and she's accepted. James nodded slowly. I figured as much. What I want to know is what your plans are, given the current situation. Pa, Zara began, but her father held up a hand. Let him answer, Zara, this concerns all of us. Trace considered his words carefully before responding. My plan, sir, was to use the reward money to purchase land, to build a home and a future worthy of your daughter. The question now is where that land should be, here in Colorado, where the Vickers might still have influence, or somewhere further away. And what does Zara want? James asked. All eyes turned to her. I want a life with Trace, she said simply, wherever that takes us, but I'd prefer it not be so far that we can't visit you, Pa. James's expression softened. I appreciate that, daughter. But your safety comes first. What about the Thompson Ranch? Ben suggested unexpectedly. The others looked at him questioningly. My brother's place in Montana Territory, he clarified. He wrote last month that he's looking to sell. Getting too old for the work, he says. It's good land with a solid house already built, near enough to settlements for necessary supplies, far enough away to be private, and importantly outside Vickers' sphere of influence. Montana, Trace repeated, considering the possibility. It was far enough from Colorado to be safe, yet not so distant as to prevent occasional visits to James or Ben and Margaret. You could do worse, Ben said. And you'd have neighbors who know me, who would watch out for you. What do you think? Trace asked Zara. She smiled, the warm certainty in her eyes answering before her words did. I think it sounds like a place where we could build something lasting. The decision, once made, brought a sense of purpose and direction that had been missing since the news of the Vickers' escape. Over the following days, arrangements were set in motion. Ben telegraphed his brother about the ranch, receiving an enthusiastic reply. The reward money was collected and deposited in Denver's First National Bank. And most importantly, Trace and Zara were married in a small ceremony in the hotel's garden, with Judge Parker officiating and James giving away the bride. It was a simple wedding, hastily arranged but no less meaningful for it. Zara wore a new dress of pale blue, purchased the day before in Denver's finest shop. Trace, for his part, wore a proper suit for the first time in his life, feeling simultaneously awkward and proud as he stood waiting for his bride. When Zara appeared on her father's arm, Trace felt his breath catch. The morning sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her chestnut hair, and her smile, directed solely at him, held all the promise of the future they were choosing together. The vows they exchanged were traditional, yet each word seemed to take on new significance as they pledged themselves to one another before God and their small circle of witnesses. When Judge Parker pronounced them husband and wife, Trace kissed Zara with a reverence that brought tears to Margaret's eyes and a gruff clearing of the throat from James. The celebration that followed was brief but joyous, with a small luncheon served in the hotel's private dining room. William Harmon attended, bringing news that 3 more of Vickers' men had been captured near the Wyoming border, though the main quarry remained at large. The governor asked me to convey his apologies that this situation isn't fully resolved, Harmon told Trace and Zara. And his congratulations on your marriage. Please thank him for his support, Trace replied. Without it, I might still be running, or worse. As the gathering dispersed, James drew Trace aside for a private word. I want you to know, he said, his voice gruff with emotion, that I couldn't have chosen better for my daughter. You're a good man, Thomas Norwood, the kind who stands for what's right even when it costs him. Trace was momentarily speechless, moved by the unexpected praise. Thank you, sir. I'll do everything in my power to make her happy. I know you will, James replied, and when things settle down, when you're established in Montana, Margaret and I would welcome a visit. See this ranch of yours. You'll always be welcome, Trace assured him, always. 2 days later, with arrangements finalized and preparations complete, Trace and Zara departed for Montana Territory. They traveled by train as far as the rails would take them, then by stagecoach to the small settlement near their new home. The journey was long but uneventful, each mile northward seeming to lift a weight from Trace's shoulders. By the time they reached the small town of Gallatin Crossing, he found himself looking forward rather than back, planning for the future rather than dwelling on the past. Thomas Thompson's ranch proved to be everything his brother had described: 1,000 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, a sturdy log house with 4 rooms, a barn, and outbuildings. The previous owner had left most of the furniture, along with a small herd of cattle and 3 horses. "What do you think?" Trace asked as they stood on the porch of what would be their home, watching the sun set over mountains still capped with spring snow. Zara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I think it's perfect," she said softly, "our own piece of the world." That night, as husband and wife, they truly began the life they had chosen together. In the privacy of their bedroom, with moonlight filtering through the window, they discovered each other fully for the first time, their union a tender affirmation of the vows spoken days before. Afterward, as Zara slept beside him, Trace found himself marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a wounded fugitive to a man with a name cleared, a wife beloved, and a home to call his own, it seemed almost miraculous. Yet it had happened not through miracles, but through courage, determination, and the healing power of love. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm of work and discovery as they made the ranch truly their own. Trace repaired fences, worked with the cattle, and planted a kitchen garden at Zara's request. She, in turn, transformed the house into a home, adding touches that reflected her practical nature and aesthetic sense. Word spread quickly through the small community that the new owners of the Thompson place were related to Marshal Ben Thompson from Silver Creek. Neighbors called to introduce themselves, bringing welcome gifts and offers of assistance. Among them was the local doctor, an elderly man named Wilson who, upon learning of Zara's medical knowledge, immediately recruited her to assist with cases beyond his aging capabilities. "You have a gift, Mrs. Norwood," he told her after they had successfully treated a child's broken arm. "It would be a shame not to use it." And so Zara found herself with an unexpected apprenticeship, riding out with Dr. Wilson to attend patients across the valley, learning from his experience while sharing her own knowledge of herbs and treatments learned from her mother. Trace supported her work wholeheartedly, proud of the respect she quickly earned in the community. When she mentioned the possibility of eventually attending medical college in the East, he encouraged her to correspond with schools that might consider a married woman student. "We'll find a way," he promised. "If it's what you truly want." "For now," Zara replied, "this is enough. Learning from Dr. Wilson, helping where I can, the future will unfold as it should." As summer gave way to autumn, they received news from Colorado. Ben wrote that Stanley and Randall Vickers had been apprehended trying to cross into Canada. They would stand trial in Denver for multiple charges, with Trace's deposition serving as key evidence. "You won't need to return to testify in person," Ben assured them in his letter. "Judge Parker has ruled that your sworn statement, combined with other evidence, is sufficient. The Vickers' reign of terror is over." The letter brought a profound sense of closure. That night, Trace and Zara sat on their porch watching stars appear above the mountains, a warmth between them that had nothing to do with the season. "I was thinking," Trace said, breaking a comfortable silence, "that we might invite your father to visit for Christmas. And Ben and Margaret too, if they can make the journey." Zara's face lit up at the suggestion. "That would be wonderful, I miss them. And in the spring," he continued, "we could start building that addition to the house. The one we talked about." She looked at him questioningly. "Why the spring? I thought we agreed to wait a year or two until the ranch was more established." Trace smiled, taking her hand in his. "Because by spring we might need the extra room." Understanding dawned in Zara's eyes. "Are you asking if—" "Dr. Wilson mentioned something when I was in town yesterday," Trace admitted. "Something about his examination of you last week. He assumed I already knew." "I was waiting for the right moment to tell you," Zara said, her free hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "I wanted to be certain." Trace's heart seemed to expand in his chest, filled with a joy he had never imagined possible. "And are you certain?" Zara nodded, her eyes shining in the twilight. "Yes, we're going to have a baby, Trace. Next spring." He gathered her in his arms then, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "For saving me," he said simply. "Not just my life that day when I fell bleeding at your door, but my heart, my future, everything that matters." Zara drew back slightly to look into his face. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "And now we'll build something worth saving, a home, a family, a life together." As they sat entwined on their porch, watching night claim the valley that was now their home, Trace reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought them to this moment. From a wounded fugitive to a husband, soon to be a father, with land of his own and a name restored, it was more than he had ever dared to hope for. Yet here it was, real and solid around him. The woman in his arms, the child growing beneath her heart, the home they had made together. And in that moment, Thomas Norwood, once convinced that the frontier allowed no place for love, understood at last that it was love itself that had made the wilderness a home.